This occurred in a meadow called Runnymede between the Windsor and the Staines on the 15th day of June in 1215, and the witnesses and guarantors of this were listed, the great barons of England, and the head was Stephen Langdon, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So this is an example of the sort of thing that was going on. Now, did the English kings always abide by this? No. But it was always something that could be pointed to by people who wanted to defend their rights in England, the Magna Carta. And finally, in the Middle Ages, there was a doctrine of natural law. This finally had become the official doctrine of the Catholic Church. It was taught in every university, from Oxford to Salamanca to the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, that the prince is beneath the law, and the purpose of the law is the common good, not the aggrandizement of the ruler. Well, this was followed by the Renaissance. Now, our idea, or the idea many people have of the Renaissance, was that this was a great release and liberation of the human spirit. Well, debatable, but in any case, from a political point of view, the Renaissance was a number of steps backward. And the typical Renaissance political philosopher was not Thomas Aquinas, for instance, from the Middle Ages, who believed in natural law and limits on the power of the ruler. The Renaissance political philosopher was Machiavelli, and really very typical of Renaissance political thought. Many of you probably have read his little book, The Prince, which is a manual of how to gain and hold on to and increase power. So it was written for the prince. And I don't know how true this is, but it's said that through history, through the centuries, princes like Frederick the Great of Prussia, or maybe Mussolini and others, have used this manual. Machiavelli was very cynical in his advice. Don't confiscate a man's property totally, because a man more easily forgets the death of his father than the taking away of his patrimony. Well, I don't want to say that this whole period up until the 18th century is one simply of absolutism, although in politics it is. The great monarchies are now beginning to develop. The introduction of gunpowder made the castles of the barons in every country very vulnerable now, and the kings more and more depended on taxation with which they bought their own armies, didn't have to depend on feudal levies. The Reformation had come in, and that now split Christianity, so that the Protestant churches, as well as the Catholic Church, looked to the state for aid against each other. The Catholic Church, which had at certain times very heroically stood against the power of the ruler and the claims of absolute power, now had to go begging to the kings for aid because they wanted to protect themselves against incursions by Protestantism. But this period is not totally without interest for our purposes. As Americans, of course, we share the English bias. The Spaniards are all extremely vicious people. Well, they do bullfighting, don't they? And cruel, and totally without any kind of merit, except maybe Velasquez and Cervantes, but aside from that. Well, I mentioned yesterday Guido's great book. Well, another book that, I don't know how your finances go, but another book which is very valuable. It's really a liberal education in itself, because it doesn't just deal with the somewhat, the naturally limited topics that Guido's book covers. It deals with the whole history of economic thought from the very beginning. Unfortunately, Murray Rothbard wasn't able to finish this, so it stopped short of the Austrian school. In a way, that's kind of where Guido then picks up. This is a history of economic thought in 2 volumes by Murray Rothbard. And you can see it in the bookstore here. You can look it over. Now, the reason I mention it at this point is that Murray has an excellent chapter on the School of Salamanca. They say Salamanca, it's a great university in Spain, but there were other Catholic universities involved. These were all monks, the people who wrote and contributed to this body of thought. And Vittoria, for instance, was one of the greatest of them. Murray says, this is the beginning of modern economic thought. Now, Catholic thought, economic thought in the Middle Ages for a long time had a bad reputation as being in favor of all kinds of limitations on freedom of economic movement. But Murray points out, other scholars have done research on this, for instance, the Catholic idea of the just price, according to the School of Salamanca. The just price was the competitive market price. And one thing that Murray points out, these authors of the School of Salamanca based their whole economic theory on utility. Okay, this is going to be, and this went on in the continent. The Italian economists, also then in France, and Murray's book is very interesting from this point of view. We think of the history of economic thought in terms of the British, of Adam Smith, and then David Ricardo and Malthus, and then finally John Stuart Mill. And Murray says all of those people were fatally tainted. Their theory was undermined by the fact that to one degree or another, they accepted the labor theory of value. And then Marx comes along and says, well, I just accept the theories that these bourgeois economists have produced, namely that labor is the basis of all value. Murray says that the continental writers, starting with the School of Salamanca, said that no, that's not the case. The point of production is consumption, and the pleasure of the consumer. So anyway, so if you don't get a chance to buy Murray's book, you maybe can look at it. Well, of course, it's in the library also. Well, there was in this modern period an absolutist offensive, that is, absolutism in the sense of absolute power for the ruler, and the destruction of all these other institutions that had limited the ruler's power during the Middle Ages. And one by one, for instance, the different diets and in France, the States General and so on went into oblivion. They had limited the ruler's power in the past, but now the kings simply swept over them. They were at best ghost institutions with no real power. However, the absolutist offensive, which looked to be on the point of conquering all of Europe, ran into some problems. The first was the Dutch.